The step sequencer provides an easy way to create and edit MIDI patterns as it loops over a set sequence. Notes can be turned on and off by clicking on cells or recorded using step record. As a result, it's ideally suited to drums and works closely with drum maps, but can be used to create loops for any instrument. It can be opened by selecting it from the Views menu or pressing Alt-4. By default, it opens in the multi-dock, which you can maximise by pressing Shift-D. We'll take a quick tour now and look at each element in more detail as we use the view. At the top we have a menu. This allows us to work with rows, load and save patterns, as well as the various options. Next is a toolbar. This contains transport controls and lets you specify the pattern length and behaviour when inputting new notes. Each row represents a unique pitch or drum in a drum map, and the name or note you see here will depend on its associated MIDI track. The sound can be auditioned by clicking on the name, and the row can be renamed by clicking on the name field and pressing F2 or Enter. The row note assignment can be changed using the up and down arrow, and can be muted or soloed using the appropriate button. The first LED will light when the row's note is being received, and the second one indicates that this is the currently affected row. If routed to an instrument synth, the rows will be note names, but a drum map or drum synth will display drum names instead. If you have a drum synth attached and you don't see drum names, try setting the associated MIDI track to channel 10. Clicking on the arrow icon to the left of the row name expands that row. This reveals more controls. The row's output port can be changed here by double-clicking and selecting an output port. Each row can have a different setting. This effectively operates like a simplified drum map, and once set up can be saved as a blank pattern. By default, the output channel is set by the MIDI track, but it can be overridden by selecting a channel here. Each row has its own independent group of controls for various parameters, useful for making patterns sound more natural. These controls affect all notes on the row. Individual notes can have the parameters set in the controllers pane. Access to the data currently being input or edited in this pane to the right is controlled from the row's edit filter. We'll be working with these shortly. You can insert and delete rows from the right-click menu, or use the icons at the top. While we're here, we'll take a look at the rest of the menu. Cut and copy row steps will copy any current steps to the clipboard, but cut will also remove them, while paste will insert any copied steps into the row. You can move notes backwards and forwards in time with the shift steps options. The notes move right or left accordingly. Adjust velocity multiplier applies an amount of compression or expansion. Default is 1, and a lower value is compression. Above 1 is expansion. Rename row is the same as pressing F2 or Enter, while the name row field has focus. The fill every command allows us to quickly fill rows at regular intervals. Rows can be reordered by using the row grab bar and click and dragging it up or down. Any changes made here can be saved as a pattern which can be loaded up each time you want it. All row settings and assignments are saved as well. That's done by selecting Save Pattern As from the Pattern menu. A pattern can also be cleared completely from this menu. The Notes pane is where we turn notes on and off to create a pattern. Left-click adds a note, right-click deletes it. Double-clicking adds a flam. Settings for the flam can be controlled by the flam knob in the row header. This will adjust the time between the two hits. Turn fully to the left shortens the time, resulting in an almost phased sound. Fully to the right will result in 2 distinct hits. If you want to hear each note as inserted, make sure that the trigger note on click option is checked up in the options menu. Of course, if you'd rather not hear it, turn it off. Now we've had a quick look at the interface, let's put together a simple pattern. The first thing to decide is what pattern length we want. And I'm going to create a 2-bar pattern. To do that, we need to increase the number of beats per pattern. The project is in 4/4 time, so 2 bars will be 8 beats. The steps per beat is a resolution at which we can insert notes. There is a loose relationship between this and note length, but it is controlled by where we position notes rather than the actual number of steps. For example, let's say you want to insert 8th notes. We could do this by inserting 2 steps per beat and using each step. However, this is restrictive as we have no way of inserting 16ths if needed. We can, however, add more steps but still insert 8th notes. Let's increase the steps to 8. The maximum is 16. Now to insert eighths, we can draw 2 steps at equal intervals within the beat. Using this method, we can insert triplets, sixteenths, etc. For example, that still inserts eighths. The Fit to Quarters button will force the pattern to fit the specified number of quarter beats. You could use this if you have a song at a different time signature. For example, if we had a song in 5/4 time, changing this number to 5 and turning the button on, the pattern will now fit 5 quarter notes rather than 4. Monophonic or polyphonic mode controls whether we're able to drill more than 1 note per step. Be able to draw a hi-hat at the same time as a snare hit, for example, this will need to be set to polyphonic. The play button starts the step sequence of playback, and we can insert notes while playback is happening, and it's a good way to get a good feel for the pattern we're creating or perhaps get some inspiration. Right-clicking on it will also start step recording, which leads us to the step record button. When active, it allows us to input notes via a MIDI controller in a similar way to step recording regular MIDI tracks. The step sequence will wait until notes are pressed, and then once they're released, the position indicator moves to the next step. There are some differences though. The step where any notes will be inserted is indicated by the red light at the top of the step. If the controller key pressed isn't mapped to a row in the step sequencer, the step is skipped. If it's mapped, the notes are entered accordingly. This is helpful for moving forward without actually entering any data. Using the regular undo command will undo any inserted notes and move back 1 step. I'm going to insert a few hits via my controller, and you'll see it can be a relatively quick way of inputting notes. Let's clear this pattern first. So let's turn that off, clear the pattern again, and look at entering some notes via the interface. I'm going to hide the inspector so we can see more or less the full width of the step sequencer. And I'm going to start with a closed hi-hat. I could click on every note that I want a hi-hat on, but there's a quicker way. I'm going to use the Fill Notes Every 4 option, found by right-clicking and selecting it from the context menu. The last hit I'm going to turn off by right-clicking on it and insert an open hi-hat instead. Let's see how that sounds. Don't worry about the robotic sound at this stage, we'll address that shortly. I'm going to put a kick drum on the downbeat of each measure and either side of beat 3. A snare beat on beats 2 and 4. And also on beat 3 and just after the beat there as well. So let's have a listen back. You can hear that we have a very robotic sounding simple beat. So now let's edit it a little using some of the tools mentioned earlier. First, I'll open up the hi-hat row and use the time control to move the hi-hat a little ahead of the beat. If I move it fully left, you'll hear it as more of an extreme rather than subtle setting. Turning it right will put it behind the beat. Now I'm going to introduce some velocity differences between the hits. The beat hits I'll leave fairly high, but those on the rebounds I'll turn down. To adjust these, we simply click on the level meters. I'm going to add a little hi-hat fill at the end of the sequence. I'm going to make that sound a little bit more realistic by adjusting the velocities again. But when I roll that out, I don't want that to sound every time that the pattern plays, so I'm going to change the probability setting. Probability will introduce some randomness. Change the edit filter to step play probability, and at the moment, all the hi-hat hits are set at 100. That means that every hit will play every time. I want to reduce the hits that make the fill to about 20. That means they'll only play about once in every 5 bars. I'm also going to bring the 4th beat hi-hat forward slightly, as well as the rebound between 3rd and 4th beat. I'll add a bit of time delay to the hit between the rebound and beat, and let's see how that sounds. I'll change the edit filter to time offset, add an offset to the last beat hit in each bar, and to the previous rebound hit. I'll solo the hi-hat so you can hear it better. I think I'm going to put a kick in on the beat as well, reduce its velocity slightly and its play probability to around 50. Let's open up the kick drum row and change the edit filter. Now let's unsolo the hi-hat and have another listen. Obviously, you can change a lot more there to suit yourself, and I've only just really brushed the surface with it. We can hide the step sequencer by pressing D, and now that sequence can be rolled out for as long as we want it. We can right-click on it and select Bounce to Clip to turn it into a regular MIDI clip. Double-clicking on it now will open it in the PRV. To convert a MIDI clip to a step sequencer clip, right-click on it and select Convert MIDI clips to step sequencer. We ask for the resolution, which I'm going to leave at a 16th, then click on OK. That's now back as a step sequencer clip. Control-click and dragging a clip will create a second link copy. Now any editing done in one will also affect the other. If you don't want that behaviour, right-click on the clip and select Unlink Step Sequencer Clips. This is a good technique to use to build a basic starting beat that can then be embellished for bridge, choruses and fill sections. And that completes a brief look at the step sequencer.